Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the real reasons why I cannot return to the USA. Reason number one, well, I'm just afraid I'm not going to get past the airport.
Arresting me for what? I thought this was America. Huh? Isn't this America? I'm sorry, I thought this was America.
Yeah, that's right. After living in Mexico for over 6 years, I'm actually afraid of going back to the USA and being confronted by the authority figures at the airport. As you guys already know, for those of you guys that have traveled abroad, the minute that you enter the USA again, you start getting grilled by Homeland Security as to where you've been, what were you doing abroad, and a bunch of other fun questions that they cannot wait to start asking you once you arrive.
Bruh.
And the longer you've been gone from the USA, the more likely that something's just going to pop up out of nowhere and is going to cause some problems for you. I have heard multiple stories of many people out there that have been living abroad in some other country, and once they return to the USA, well, the authorities are there to remind them that they have some sort of outstanding parking tickets or red light camera tickets or citations, or something with the IRS, or something with child support, or just something super random. In fact, there's people out there like myself that have had a situation in the past where they had to deal with the court system and so on and so forth. And even though everything is all cleared up, well, you're always going to be in the system, and they're going to continuously remind you of that. I have known people that have never left the USA. They've been living in the USA their whole lives, and they might have gotten like a DUI like 15, 20 years ago, and they still get pulled over randomly just simply because that pops up on their record, and the police officer uses that as an excuse to pull you over to see if you're still drinking. All right. And so therefore, imagine if you've left the USA a long time ago and there's some random things that could just pop up out of nowhere. As you already know, it's not like they have the best bookkeeping records out there in the USA. And many times it's, they're going to arrest you or they're going to deal with you in an unsavory manner. And then they're going to figure out exactly what happened later. So basically, they're going to detain you, arrest you, and then they'll figure out while they clear it up. Again, their mistake is now your problem. And so for me personally, I just don't want to return to the USA to be dealing with that at the airport. For some of you guys out there that are new and do not know my full story, that have not followed me for that long, well, I left the USA over 6 years ago, and I've been living out here in Mexico since then. And one of the reasons I left, there's multiple reasons why I left, but one of the main reasons I left was because at that point in my life, I was dealing with something that happened to me in Texas. Again, I'll make this a long story short. I was driving through Texas. I got wrongfully pulled over, illegally detained, searched, and so on and so forth. And well, of course, when things like that happen in the middle of nowhere, they just happen to find something that just comes out of nowhere. And because of that, I was in the system for a very long time, and I had to deal with that, and I had to pay my way out of jail, pay my way to get my freedom back, and so on and so forth. And even though today I stand before you as a free man and I've cleared everything up, the reality was that it wasn't until I moved to Mexico and I had to deal with it from a foreign country in order for it to actually clear up. Because after many years of trying to clear it up on my own in the USA, well, they just always found a reason to keep extending it and keep making it a worse situation for me as time went on. So eventually, once I left the USA and I moved to Mexico, and they found out, and they obviously were not happy that I was living in Mexico, well, they didn't have a choice but to finally play ball and finally put an end to the extortion racket that they were pulling on me, because at the end of the day, all they wanted was money, and they knew that, well, once I was gone from the USA, that they couldn't extort me anymore because I simply didn't have to return, since it was a petty crime to begin with. But long story short, I was able to pay it off. I was able to get my paperwork, that says I am a free man. But I still don't know what could happen if I go into the USA and I have to pass through immigration, Homeland Security, all that jazz. and they might just bring that up. It's not just that. Again, they might bring up something that I didn't even know was on my record. I've traveled all over the USA, and I don't know if I was driving through Arizona or North Carolina or Wyoming at some point in my life, and I got some sort of ticket from a red light camera, and that is enough to not just detain me, but to also arrest me until they clear it up. And of course, you already know it's because of safety reasons, right? You know, my own safety, their own safety. They don't want no hoodlum out there, running around because I didn't pay, a parking ticket or whatever it is that they say that I did or didn't do. So just the fact that I might not even be able to get past the airport is reason enough to not want to return to the USA anytime soon. Another reason is my health. Ever since I've left the USA, my mental health and my physical health has greatly improved. And so I'm already used to that. I'm already used to living in a foreign country and eating healthy, being in a healthy environment, not constantly dealing with unnecessary stress all the time. And I've already gotten used to that life. So I know that once I return to the USA, I'm not going to have access to healthy food on a regular basis. I'm not going to be stress free. Again, the stress starts as soon as I land in the USA, and it continues to escalate as I'm there. For example, as soon as I leave the airport and I got to deal with traffic, I got to start dealing with angry Americans. I got to start dealing with, American life as a whole. The stress levels are just going to go through the roof. And that's just something I'm not willing to deal with at the moment. And I'm just not ready for. I mean, again, I've been living out here in Mexico for over 6 years, extremely stress-free compared to what my life was back in the USA. So, and I know how things are over there because I deal with people that come from the USA all the time, and they constantly remind me of how stressful it is to live out there in the United States. So again, not only do I remember and I have my own PTSD because of that, but I'm constantly reminded by people like you guys out there in the audience that are constantly reminding me as to how crazy, stressful life is out there. And I'm not going to bore you with the details. You guys already know. You guys are living in it right now. And as it comes to physical health, well, that's also a major concern. I mean, the fact that I have already been used to eating so much healthy food, I'm actually afraid of going to the USA and feeling sick. Okay, not just from the food I'm eating, but from the water I'm drinking, the air I'm breathing, the environment I'm in, and so on and so forth. Again, the toxic people, the toxic environment, everything of just being in the USA is going to be a very taxing and tolling experience on my body. And I'm just not willing to deal with that at the moment. So again, that's another reason I just don't want to go to the USA anytime soon. I'm scared for my health. I'm not just scared for my health, I'm also scared in general. Again, it's not just getting through the airport, but once I'm outside of the airport, I'm going to be dealing with police officers. At some point, they're just everywhere. And you guys already know, I could be simply driving my rental car out of the airport, and as I'm driving out of the airport, there might be a police officer just pulling people over for whatever reason, and here we go again. We're just going to be dealing with that whole situation again. And so many of you guys in the USA, you already know. You guys are constantly, for the most part, in fear of being pulled over. Not because of anything you did wrong, but of whatever they're going to find that you did wrong. And it can be as simple as, you have a broken taillight, or simply, hey, you're driving a rental car, and who are you, and what are you doing? And they just, again, the whole song and dance where they pull you over to ask you a bunch of questions and to see if they can find something, whatever it is, okay? It's not necessarily like you have anything illegal on you. It could just simply be you have a bad attitude. And if you answer the police officer in a wrong way and you insult them or whatever it is, again, you're looking at going back to jail for no reason at all. So it's not just dealing with them, but it's also dealing with the average American these days, whether they're high on drugs on the street or whether they're extremely angry and they're going to shoot at you because of some road rage incident, or you're getting a fight at Walmart over whatever it is, and I could go on and on. Again, just going back to the stress, well, not only are you going to be stressed, am I going to be stressed from returning, but imagine the people that are actually living there in the USA on a daily basis and how stressed they are. And again, the toxicity of all that stress and just dealing with that danger, that constant danger that you're going to have to deal with when it is to interact with the average American out there. And this is the reality of it. You just never know what could happen. And so I myself, I'm scared of returning back to the USA just simply because I just don't know. I don't know what could happen. I mean, seriously, so many people tell me so many stories, especially the ones that return to the USA. And it's always like this huge shock as to how horrible and how dangerous it actually is in the USA. But for the typical American these days, they have just been able to normalize it because, well, they don't know anything else. But once you've been living outside of the country, especially, 6 years like myself, well, it really starts to affect you in a negative way really quickly because, well, you're just not used to that anymore. And so now all of a sudden you got to return to the USA and it's bang right in your face, and it's only gotten worse as time has gone on. So for me, I'm just scared of authority. I'm scared of random people, shooting you for no reason, or a random bullet just escaping, or someone wanting to fight with you, or someone trying to rob you on the streets, whether it's for drugs or whether it's just simply because they need something to eat. I could go on and on. The danger is everywhere. And not only is the danger everywhere, but as I was touching on a few seconds ago, the culture shock, which entails some of these things that I was already talking about. I'm used to living in a free country, which is Mexico, and therefore going back to the USA, which is not a free country. It is a country full of tyranny. Again, now, constantly being stopped and questioned by authority figures. The fact that, everything is poison around me, the way that the typical American lives their life. And I could go on and on. There's just so many things about living in the USA that are going to just be a huge culture shock to me. And not just to me, but to everyone out there in the audience that has actually lived abroad or has spent a lot of time somewhere else and they return back home to the USA. The culture shock is just immense. And I personally don't think I'm going to be ready to deal with that ginormous amount of culture shock, which will come from returning back home to the USA. Another reason why I cannot return to the USA is because I don't have a valid ID. I don't have a valid US driver's license at the moment. The only thing I have as an ID is my valid US passport. And for many things out there, that's just not a valid ID for many institutions in the United States. And that's going to cause a lot of hiccups and a lot of problems. I'm not even going to be able to rent a car because, again, the only thing I really have is a Mexican driver's license, and an American with a Mexican driver's license is probably not going to be able to rent a car. It's as simple as that. And so it's not just that, but even if I were to rent a car, and then all of a sudden I get pulled over by a police officer, how am I going to explain that to them? You already know it's not as easy as one might think. And so therefore, just not having ID, not having any kind of thing that ties me to the USA will make it extremely difficult to function in the USA. Even if I'm just coming out there on vacation, things are just going to be extremely difficult. Whereas I'm living out here in Mexico, and well, I don't ever get asked for identification out here in Mexico ever, unless I'm actually going to some sort of government office and doing some sort of bureaucratic procedure. There's no reason for me to ever have to show my ID out here in Mexico. In fact, I keep my passport, locked away, nice and safe, because since I never have to use it for anything, well, why have it out? Why have it exposed, to get lost or damaged or anything like that? So one thing I really love about living out here in Mexico is the fact that I don't have to have ID on me all the time, constantly. It's very rare in which, I'm going to have to show my identification. And so it just makes life so much easier easier. But in the USA, you already know, you got to show your ID for everything. Well, except if I'm going to go vote. Other than that, you need to show your ID for just about everything out there. And so, well, I'm not really, interested in going to the USA to have to deal with all that of not having an identification, but then most likely, being prompted to go out there and go to the DMV to go get a new license or whatever it is. So for me, just the fact that I'm only going to have my US passport and I'm not really looking forward to dealing with that situation out there in the USA is another reason why I don't want to go back there. Now, I know for a lot of you guys out there in the audience, it might seem like a dumb reason, but if you have a valid passport, start using that as your actual ID in the USA to see how far that's really going to get you, because they're going to start asking you, how come you don't have a real ID? How come you don't have a driver's license? How come you're using your passport? This is very weird. We need to identify you and identify what state you're coming from and so on and so forth. And I don't want to keep going too much further into this, but this is an actual problem. And this is not something I'm actually looking forward to. Out here in Mexico, if I have to, I can drive without a license. Now, again, I don't recommend it, but it's just to show you how different things are out here. In the USA, I can drive with a foreign license until I actually get stopped by a police officer. And then, well, that's when all the fun really starts, because, well, that's not a valid ID in their eyes. So I could go on and on. It's something that's more of a hassle than anything else, and it's not something I'm looking forward to dealing with if I have to go back to the USA. Another reason is that, well, I am married to a Mexican. So even though it was very easy for me to come to Mexico, I basically just had to cross the border, and they gave me a tourist visa, and eventually I was able to turn that tourist visa into a permanent residency. Well, it's not as easy for a Mexican to enter the USA. Even though she is my wife, we have been married for close to 5 years already, and you would think that that would be, reason enough for her to be able to just walk right into the USA with me without a problem. But again, if I'm being detained and I'm being questioned and all this other stuff at the airport for no reason at all, well, imagine what they're going to be doing to her. And not just that, but getting a visa for her is not as easy. I know a lot of people in the audience might say, oh, it's actually pretty easy to get a visa for her, but no, not really. You actually have to jump through a lot of hoops and go through a lot of procedures and bureaucracy just for her to get a valid visa for her to come and visit the USA with her husband. Okay, so it's a whole thing. All right, and don't even get me started on this. My parents were immigrants, okay, and it took them a long time to get their residency and to get their citizenship. So it's kind of like the same thing. Out here in Mexico, me as an American, it was actually very easy for me to get my residency and for me now to eventually get my citizenship. But when it's the other way around, it's actually not that easy. It's actually very, very difficult. In fact, if you try to do it the right way, the more difficult it is for you to get residency and citizenship in the USA. So for me, just having to deal with that situation where I got to deal with my wife's visa and then deal with that situation once we're in the USA. I mean, think about it. She's going to be on a spousal visa. So again, you never know what kind of authority figure is going to stop us. And let's just say that she might be going to the grocery store on her own, and she gets stopped by a police officer, and all of a sudden that police officer is deeming that her spousal visa is not enough identification, and how come her spouse isn't with her, and I could go on and on. All right, I don't want to get into all that, but again, just that alone, having to deal with my wife's visa and dealing with that situation, again, is another reason why I am not looking forward to ever having to go back to the USA anytime soon. Another reason is the fact that, well, the USA is just way too expensive and out of my budget at the moment. Again, the real reason I left the USA was because I couldn't afford it anymore. And so for anyone out there that knows my story, you guys already know, over 6 years ago, before I came out here to Mexico, I was living in a room, in a house with a bunch of other people in Los Angeles. And my rent, again, over 6 years ago for a room was over $1,000. All right. And that's just rent. That wasn't including all my other expenses. So right off the bat, I already know that the USA was expensive and is definitely even more expensive in today's world. And so obviously, in order for me to go visit the USA, I got to save up a lot of money. I got to make sure I have enough money to not just go to the USA, but to be able to stay in the USA, even if it's just for a few days or a week. Again, the reason I had to leave the USA was because I couldn't afford it anymore. It was just too expensive, and I wasn't making enough money. And I had fallen on hard times because of the whole situation that happened to me in Texas. And so therefore, I had multiple reasons why I had to leave, but they were mostly all stemming around the financial aspect. The fact that I couldn't pay, my extortion fee with the Texas authority figures anymore. I couldn't find an affordable place to live. I really couldn't find anywhere to really, be able to work and make enough money and live comfortably, and so on and so forth. And so, again, I was already at the point where I was going to be living on the streets. I was going to be living in Skid Row or living out of my car, and again dealing with the fact that the people in Texas were probably going to be sending Dog the Bounty Hunter after me. So it was just all these things together that basically just cemented it for me, where it's like, all right, I got to leave. I got to go move to Mexico, where I know I'll be able to survive, because not only do I know the language, but I'll be able to afford to live out there. And I also know that they're not going to come after me, because they cannot legally come after me over some petty crime that I did in Texas. So that's why I ended up coming to Mexico when I did. And so with my measly earnings that I make out here in Mexico, which is around 1,000 to 1,500 US dollars a month, well, that's just not enough. That's just not enough to go out there to the USA to visit. Let alone live. Out here in Mexico, that is plenty of money to live a nice and comfortable life. Not just live a nice and comfortable life, but I can, travel all around Mexico. I could do all kinds of things. Again, sure, on a frugal budget, managing my money, but at the end of the day, I can definitely live out here and survive out here on that amount of money. So with that said, I mean, think about how expensive things would be if I were to go and travel to the USA. It's not just the plane tickets, but the hotel, the food, probably a car rental, because you already know there's no mass transit or anything like that in the USA, and I have to rent a car, which again, I'm going to have to figure out how I would have to do that without having a valid US driver's license. But at the end of the day, it is not cheap. It is extremely expensive. If it was already expensive 6+ years ago when I left, I cannot even imagine how expensive it is today. So therefore, if I'm even going to think about traveling to the USA, I'm going to have a lot of money saved up just to go. And again, it's not just to pay for the expenses that I just mentioned, but let's just say that I do get arrested at the airport, or detained, for my own safety over nothing, until they figure out, what actually happened and they clear it all up on their end. But again, if something like that were to happen, that's going to cost even more money, and I could go on and on and on. So the reality is that I just cannot afford it. I cannot afford to go to the USA under any circumstances at the moment. And so to bring it all full circle, again, not only do I not want to go to the USA for my mental health, my physical health, I'm scared of what could happen to me there at any moment's time, not just at the airport, but out there, once I'm out there in the wild with everybody else. The fact that it's too expensive, the reverse culture shock, which is just thinking about it is already too much for me. The fact that, my wife is going to have a difficult time, with her situation with the visa. The fact that I don't have a valid ID outside of my passport. Besides all of that, there's also one very important reason as to why I cannot return to the USA. And that is simply because I don't want to. I have absolutely no want or desire to do so. The best thing that ever happened to me in my life was moving to Mexico. I did not know it back then. I had no idea that it was going to be such a life-changing experience for me to leave the USA and experience real life. Be able to breathe the air, literally and figuratively. There's just so many things that make living in Mexico so wonderful and so great. In fact, I have dedicated myself to make videos about that subject on my channel on a weekly basis, okay? Many of you guys out there in the audience that have watched my videos in the past, you guys already know how wonderful life can be out here, what freedom really looks like, okay, and what it feels like by living out here in Mexico, or again, just abroad, anywhere but the USA at the moment. And so for a lot of you guys already, you guys know what I'm talking about. You guys know exactly what I mean about what it is to live out here and what it would actually entail to return to the USA. And so therefore, you guys totally understand why I don't want to return or cannot return to the USA. But for some of you guys out there that still have no idea who I am or what my channel is all about, well, I encourage you guys to check out the rest of my channel and check out all these other videos, the ones that I'm going to be linking at the end of this one and link down below, so you guys can really see what it is to live out here. Ever since I moved out here over 6 years ago, I have been documenting my whole experience of living out here in Mexico. And one of the major things that I noticed right off the bat from living out here is the freedom that one has, the true freedom that people have out here. And not just the freedom, but the quality of life that is just above and beyond anything that you could ever have in the USA. And again, not just the freedom, not just the quality of life, but so many other things that make living out here in Mexico so wonderful and so amazing, that just the thought of having to return to the USA is the only stress that I really do feel while living out here in Mexico. So with all that being said, guys, I really want to give a big shout out to all my members out there, whether you're on YouTube, on Patreon, on Buy Me a Coffee, or wherever you're at. I want to give a big shout out to every single one of you guys, every single one of my subscribers, whether you've only been here 1 day or 100 days or 6 years. I love you guys and I appreciate you guys. I want to give a big shout out to all of you. And I also want to give a big shout out to every single one of you guys that leaves a comment down below, whether you're asking me a question or whether you're leaving some extra information so that all of us out there can learn from it and grow from it. Again, we're trying to build a community here, whether it's by sending $1 or leaving a comment below or sharing this video with a friend or an enemy or whoever. And I'm trying to create a platform so that we can have as many people out there share their experiences about living in Mexico or coming to Mexico or ask their questions and so on and so forth. And we're just trying to help everyone out there. So again, I want to give a big shout out to every single one of you guys, all of you guys that help contribute to the show. And if you want to see more videos about life out here in Mexico, I encourage you guys to check out the rest of my channel and check out the videos that I'm going to be linking at the end of this one. And with all that being said, you already know the deal, guys. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to please like, please subscribe, please share, please hit that bell icon, but more importantly than anything else, please stay awesome. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.